Hello, class, and welcome to your line project. We're going to be working on contour drawings and learning how to use pencil, which might seem like a silly thing, but I'm sure you've all used pencils plenty of times, but there's maybe a lot more to pencil than you knew. And if you did know all of the stuff you're about to learn, remember there's always something new you can try. Maybe push yourself to try something you haven't tried before and keep your mind open. So pencils are made of graphite and clay, no longer made of lead, which is toxic. In the olden days, you might have heard people say that. So graphite is just a natural carbon that's made in the earth, sort of similar to how coal is made, where, the pressure of the layers of earth and decaying forests, that pressure built up and crystallizes carbon into graphite. And then it's ground into a fine powder. You can see in this image what the crystal of graphite looks like. And then it's ground up into a powder, and clay is added as a binder. So a binder is like in baking, egg is a binder. In art, in painting, for oil painting, there's linseed oil as the binder, and then watercolor has a different kind of binder. Acrylic paints have a plastic binder. So the more clay there is, the sort of harder it makes the graphite and the lighter the line. And then the less clay there is, the graphite becomes soft and it makes darker lines. So when you look at pencils, if you get a range of pencils, the regular yellow number 2 pencil is HB. So you can see that on this chart here, and you can see the amount of graphite and clay. And then if you get a range of pencils, you can see that the higher number you go with, the B, is softness. I think B is from a German word for soft, but I forget, and you can always look it up. So if you have a 6B or a 9B, it's really soft, not a lot of clay, and you can get a really dark line for shading. And then the higher number with the H is for hardness, which makes it easier to remember. I just always remember H is for hardness and the other one is soft. It makes a lighter line because there's more clay. It can also be kind of scratchy on your paper and leave a mark. So especially with the softer pencils, they can kind of shed off or become messy. And fixative is used to preserve the drawings. You can spray fixative right onto paper. It's kind of like spray paint, but it's clear, and you have to use it outside and with a mask unless you have some special ventilation for fixative. But I always recommend bringing it outside. You don't have to use it for pencil, but if you start really experimenting and your drawing is, making a mess everywhere and rubbing off onto other pieces of paper, you might want to experiment with the fixative. So this is an artist called Nakomi Nix Turner. This is from 2023. This piece is called Canceled Idols. And I just like to show you a range of artwork when we're starting a project, so you can kind of see what they can do. Now, this artist has been working for a long time, and they're really skilled at graphite. And this is a large piece. It's 14 by 22 inches, which is pretty large for a drawing. So you can see all of the different details and shading that the artist was able to create. This artist is really interesting. I think she grew up in Oregon and lives in San Francisco now. I followed her for a long time, and she's still pretty young. Anything that has the underline has a link to their website. Luckily, she has a different name, a name that not everybody has, so she's pretty easy to find if you Google her, but check out her stuff because she does really cool graphite drawings. Obviously, not ever expecting you to create something like this. I just like to show you what the possibilities are in the medium, what pencil can actually do. So the first part of your project is going to be the sketch. And remember, the sketch is like your warm up. So we're going to practice making marks, right? Like line work and really any kind of art is you're making a mark on a surface. So the sketch warm up is going to be experimenting with graphite. So you're going to make all different kinds of marks on a piece of paper, just one piece of paper and a pencil. If you only have one kind of pencil, that's fine. If you have all the different types of pencils, the H and the B, you can experiment with all of those. And anytime you try a new medium, obviously pencil isn't new to most people, but when you're experimenting with new things or trying to take your skills further, I always recommend doing something like this where you just have a piece of paper and you're not trying to do anything that looks good. You're just making a bunch of marks and seeing what the material does. So I want you to make lines as lightly as possible. Then try using a lot of pressure. It's okay if you rip your paper. Actually, if you rip your paper, that's great. It's okay if you break the pencil tip. I want you to really see how far you can go with it and how light you can go with it, and then everything in between. And I want you to try making lines of different shapes and sizes. This is your warm-up. This is just your sketch. It's supposed to be random. Your sketches you're not sharing with the class. You're just experimenting and warming up, and then submitting them to the Canvas assignment, and I'll just take a quick look at them and grade them to make sure that you did it. So it can be totally random lines. It can be totally messy. You can fill up the whole page. You can try doing some of these really light shading or the really dark shading, that you see in this artist's work. And I want you to really start thinking about juxtaposing your marks against each other. So contrasting the different types of lines. So contrast in any kind of art is really what makes things stand out, what gives it some visual interest. So think about how you can make dark and light lines, which could represent shadows and highlights. Think about thick and thin lines. Think about soft versus harsh, jagged versus smooth. Think about all these different opposites or contrast you can create with just using line. Also think about if you think line can represent an emotion. Can it be happy, sad, stressed, whatever? You don't have to answer that. That's just a question I'm throwing out there. Okay, so at the end of this presentation, I'm going to do a demonstration on the sketch, but we're going to move forward through these slides to talk about your bigger project. So you know what you're getting warmed up for. You know what the sketch is for. So we're going to do contour drawings, which are line drawings. Contour is basically line drawing. You're going to do a drawing using only lines, so no shading. We are starting to develop your observational and representational skills. So you will be observing an object and then you'll be representing it on a piece of paper. So why are we beginning with line? Line is really the first part of a drawing. It's how you start. It's also how you write your name. It's how handwriting is done. Doodling is made with lines. Everything in art kind of begins with a line. Simple line drawings are how different designers, architects, artists, comic book illustrators, animators, anyone you can think of in the creative world, they begin their work by simple line drawings. It quickly gets whatever's in your head, your ideas, down from your imagination onto paper so you can share it with other people. So then you can develop your ideas, you can iterate your ideas. Iterate is you just keep making newer and newer versions until you get to the version you want. It's also an end product in itself. Contour drawings are beautiful drawings, and that can be the work of art itself. This is, again, Mr. Pablo Picasso. He was Spanish, and he lived from 1881 to 1973, and he had a long career. He did a lot of really interesting contour drawings. So this is an example of a line drawing, no real shading happening. It's all created with line. And you can see, just when you're starting to look at art, notice the juxtaposition here, the contrast between the thick and thin lines. There's a painting or a drawing with a leaf in the background, and look at how light those lines are to show that it's in the background, versus where Picasso wants us to focus, which is the head of Stravinsky, who he's doing this portrait of, who is a very famous composer. This is from 1920. This is Susan Point, who is a Coast Salish living Native American making these beautiful artworks. There's two different artworks here that you can see, and I want to show a different kind of line. This is a really bold, graphic line. This style of artwork we recognize right away as Pacific Northwest Native American art, and it's really beautiful and striking and captures our attention. And it's representing a squirrel on the top or the spirit world on the bottom. And so there are representational imagery in here, but it's really a design too. It's abstracted in a way to make this contrast between the dark of the line work and the light of the paper or the background or whatever it's being done on. That is really high contrast to give us this really bold, exciting composition and work of art. So think about how maybe you could make really thick, bold lines like this and how they might contrast or juxtapose to a really thin, light line. This is kind of the opposite of what we just looked at, right? This is Megan Berlin, another living artist. She's Canadian, and this is from a series that was called Memory Keeping, and the artist kept every piece of glass and mirror they've ever broken until April 2020 and did these little line sketches of them. So this is kind of a really cool process and a collection that the artist made, and then doing these sort of quick, light, like they're sketchy sketches. I don't know. I use the word sketchy here as, you can see kind of jagged lines, and they're not really solid lines, where this I wouldn't call sketchy lines. These are really solid, bold lines. And then Megan Berlin has these more lighter, kind of sketchy, undefined lines. And then there's a link to the website, and this artist calls themselves a queer self-taught artist, and a queer self-taught illustrator and artist fixated on the repetition of small marks. So I liked that quote from the website, because small marks and repetition of marks is exactly what we're doing in this project. This is another living artist. She is Israeli, and her name is Maya Klinger. And this is a short comic about a fictional childhood memory of a piano lesson, which I thought was kind of funny, especially when you get to the end where you have this old piano teacher, you're a little bit scared, and then there's the huge nail clippers coming out, and it just instills a sense of fear. I think we can all recognize maybe as when we were kids, of getting our nails cut. And these are line drawings. They're very simple. They're a little different than the other ones we've looked at. They're a little darker, but also we can see that it's handmade. It's not made on a computer. It's made by hand, and it has a lot of personality and movement just in a simple line drawing. And then I think when you're creating this simple line drawing, if you introduce something that's not for this project, but in the future, like the color of the blood red, it really pops out and makes it really interesting. This is Keith Haring. He was an American artist, lived from 1958 to 1990. This is a photo of him in 1986 in his pop shop in Soho, which is a neighborhood in New York City. And he created these really bold line drawings that he first started doing in the subways in New York City in the 70s and 80s, which if you've seen images of the New York City subways in the 80s, they were filled with graffiti. And Keith Haring and another artist, Jean-Michel Basquiat, became famous in their lifetime and entered the art world after being subway graffiti artist. There's a link to Keith Haring's website, the link in his name, and then there's another link on the bottom where I say learn more about Keith Haring that has a interesting video of him actually doing these drawings in the subway, and all his drawings were really quick and simple. Even when he moved on to making these huge spaces with his drawings, he kept up with the line drawing. He did everything really fast. This is with paint. He also had a really interesting life. He was gay, and he became sick with HIV and AIDS in the 80s in the AIDS epidemic, and died from complications due to AIDS before there was any medication for it. So I encourage you to learn more about these artists if they interest you. Try to show you a range of artists that you might feel some connection to and want to learn more about. I'm sure you might have seen Keith Haring's art is all over the place. You see it on posters and on t-shirts and carpets and stuff all the time. So it's kind of cool to know the stories behind these artists. Okay, so this is your big project. After you do your sketch and submit your sketch to Canvas, you're going to work on contour drawings. So you're going to choose one everyday object, and that is what you're going to draw for both of these drawings. So you're going to do two different types of contour drawings using just the one object. So I want you to choose an everyday object because I want it to be something maybe you overlook, and then you can make more interesting something ordinary and making it extraordinary, right? And look at it in a different way. So keys are good, pens are good, coffee mugs, water bottles, backpacks are great, or a purse. It can really be anything that you might maybe use most days but don't pay a lot of attention to. Please don't do a cell phone because it's just a rectangle and it's really boring. If you have an old cool landline cell phone, landline phone, that's always interesting. So the first drawing is going to be a contour drawing. You're drawing just the outline of the object using lines. You can draw the details and stuff, but only using lines, no shading. And remember, I want you to think back to your sketch while you're doing this drawing. You can do the thicker lines for shadows, thinner lines for highlights, and think about how you can represent like different material, like fabric or different textures. Like if the material is a coarse fabric versus a silky fabric, how you can represent that with just line. It's not easy to do, but I want you to start thinking about this. So that's the first drawing, is a contour drawing where you're studying the object. So you're observing the object and then you're representing it onto the piece of paper. Then you can use a new paper, which I recommend, or you can use the same paper and you're doing a blind contour. Now, obviously I'm not going to be watching you do this. So this is about your learning. You're going to get out of it what you put into it. So I don't think cheating makes any sense here. So a blind contour is where you're drawing the same object you did for the first drawing without looking at the paper and in one continuous line. So you're looking at the object and then you're just not looking at the paper and just drawing with your pencil, never lifting your pencil up. It's going to look insane. It's going to look so weird. It's going to look bad. You're going to think it's your worst drawing ever. And that is the point. Okay. And we're really practicing looking. We're practicing the observation skills, right? So kind of detaching yourself from being obsessed with looking at the paper, being so worried about what the outcome is and what the final product is, and getting more into the process, the looking of it, the observing. So weird is good. I am going to do a demonstration for that in a different video. It'll be in the project assignment page. So right now we're going to do the demo for the sketch, and then you'll have another video which will demonstrate the contour drawings. So this is the sketch demo, which is your warm-up for the line project, for the contour project. So what I want you to do is just practice making different marks, different lines on your paper. I am using plain old computer paper, and I have these pencils which are well worn, and I'm starting with HB because that's typically what your yellow number 2 pencil will look like. And this is all I'm asking for, is you to start making different lines and try the lightest line you can make and then a line with the most pressure. and I want you to fill this whole page with different lines. If you're only working with your HB pencil or whatever pencil you have at home, that's fine. I want you to really experiment with what this graphite can do and the range of marks you can make. I'm gonna go ahead and show you the different kinds of other pencils there are, different hardnesses and softnesses, just so even if you're not using them, you can get an idea. So this is a 4H pencil, and remember, the higher number the H, the more clay is added to the graphite, and that means it is harder and more of a lighter line. So you can see I'm even pressing as hard as I can, and this line is going to come out super light, and you can see it's kind of scratchy. So that's the 4H. And I do this whenever I'm trying out new pens and pencils. I always do a page of just like experimenting and checking stuff out. So this is a 2H, so it's lower on the hardness scale, so less clay, but still going to be darker than the 4. Still going to be darker than the 4H. It goes in there. Not the best at math, this one. But it's going to give you a little bit of a darker line, but still super light and lighter. I'm putting as much pressure here, and I can't get nearly as dark as that HB. I'm not going to go through every single one because I think you'll start to get the point. But now I'm going on to the Bs, which B is for softness. So this is 3B. So this has even less clay than the HB. And you can see already it's super dark, and you can try making different lines. Even the lightest line when I'm sketching here is going to be darker than the lightest line I can make with the HB. So you can get really dark with that. And then there is 6B. Obviously there's everything in between you could be trying. And that is going to give you a really dark line. And if you break your pencil tip, that is okay. Go right ahead and do it. And then a really fun thing that I got myself recently is this graphite crayon, which is amazing. It's in 6B, and you can really start shading here. Not that we're doing a shading project, but your lines can become really, really solid and dark. And then some of you may have this tool, this mixing tool. And again, we're not doing a shading project, but I just like to talk about it. If it's in your, if you have it, you can also make this just by rolling up a piece of paper towel. I am not a big fan of smudging because I think beginning artists can sometimes rely too much on smudging. And if you smudge something like this, you know, you're just, it doesn't look as intentional. Where smudging is good is if you have a big sort of thick layer of material and then you're just softening that up together. So this is a place where smudging would make a little more sense, or even if you have a really thick line and you want to smooth it out and not have that sort of white space showing through, that's where you would use these smudge things. Now you can buy these in all different sizes and you can make your own. You can use your fingers too, but they're just not as precise as having this little tool. Again, rolled up piece of paper or paper towel is going to do the same thing. So that's all. That's it. Just fill up this paper, experiment with the different kinds of pencils, or if you're just using one pencil, that's awesome. Just make all the different lines and marks that you can. And this is something to do every time you try a new medium or you get a new set of pencils. Just test them out.